Namaste, everyone. So my essay focuses on the work of the very popular politician, Mr. Shashi Tharoor. He's also an acclaimed author and a public intellectual with many best-selling books to his credit. He's currently serving as the Member of Parliament from Thiruvananthapuram, Kerala. He has also served as the Minister of External Affairs and Human Resource Development in the Indian government. He was also formerly the Under Secretary General of the United Nations. Now, why is he important? Why is he part of this anthology? Well, Tharoor has impeccable academic credentials. He earned his PhD at just the age of 22. Then he went on to have a very successful career as an international diplomat and also a very successful career as a politician. He is currently a leader in the Indian political arena with millions of followers. He's known for his mastery over English, which is still a mark of intellectual credibility in the Indian society today. He's known to use such exotic words, which is not part of most people's everyday parlance. And his audience he's written on a variety of subjects like Indian history and culture, business, politics, and so on. However, the focus of my essay are on his writings and views on Hinduism primarily. Now, despite his proclamations about his non-scholarly work, his books are considered to be the New Age authority on Hinduism, especially in urban India. So recently, one of his followers shared an image from her son's wedding where he was carrying Tharoor's book, Why I Am a Hindu, instead of the Bhagavad Gita, because she felt that was much more relevant than the Gita itself. And she shared this proud revolutionary moment on social media, for which Tharoor acknowledged, saying he's humbled and honored and so on. So you can see that his intellectual might and power of influence in the society is well established today. But why is he an intellectual Ravana? Well, he uses his eloquence and impressive public persona to propagate his views on Dharma in India. But however, his work on Hinduism is majorly an assortment of theories drawn from colonial Indologists and historians. And just like the historical Ravana, despite his intellectual might and power of influence, his thoughts and actions are counterproductive to Dharma, as we shall discuss in this essay. So what I learned from reading Tharoor's exhaustive work on Hinduism is that he has this hypothesis or a key message that he wants to convey, that Hinduism is infinitely open. There are absolutely no boundaries whatsoever. Anything and everything is part of Hinduism. Tomorrow you want to worship this mic as a devata, so be it. You can just have a temple for it and start worshipping. So that's the gist of his interpretation of Hinduism. So here are some quotes from his books. This says, Hindu legends have the gods manifesting themselves in so many shapes and forms that the notion of one agreed image of God would be preposterous. Thus, one can imagine God as a pot-bellied man with an elephant head and also as a 10-armed woman with a beatific smile. And since both forms are equally valid to the worshipper, why not also imagine God as a bleeding man on a cross? All are acceptable to the Hindu. Acceptance is always the name of the game. So basically, this is the gist of all his work. Underlying theme is that acceptance is always the name of the game for a Hindu. Indeed, the term the Hindu way is in itself a policy, as there is no one Hindu way. Consequently, then why even be a Hindu? Someone just logically ask that question. And also he thinks books are sacred in Hinduism, so you should not, it's an offense to ban anything, even if it's a distortion or a misinterpretation of Hinduism. You should not just speak against it, because books are sacred, so speaking against a book would be against the ethos of Hinduism. And in that context, I took this quote from his book, where he was really upset when people banned Wendy Doniger's book. So this afternoon session, we have our scholars talking about Wendy Doniger. I think I'll leave it to you all to decide whether his narrative on her work is accurate or not. Now, Tharoor on religious conversion, he feels a self-confident faith like Hinduism should not really bother what its adherents do. And he thinks we must just freely allow them to convert. Well, religious conversion essentially stands for exclusivity. To basically tell an adherent of a particular faith that his faith is simply not good enough. To paraphrase Tharoor's own terms, to just see someone, your faith is not good enough, and to convert to a religion that says his way or her way is the only way, it's basically you're reducing the paths to the ultimate. And Tharoor is very proud of his labels as a pluralistic and a liberal Hindu. So it's an irony that he's supporting an act of reducing diversity. Tharoor is one of the strongest proponents of the Aryan invasion theory, and anyone who tries to refute it, he just discards us as calling them merely, controversy created by Hindutvavadis. He just says, and to support his claims, he says migrations have always been part of the Indian history, so there's no doubt that the Aryans came and founded Hinduism. And his entire chronology is based on this theory. So, it's just basically 1500 BC, they invaded India, they composed the Vedas and so on. And there's mounting evidence against the theory. Infinity Foundation has produced many conferences, many books on this subject. And even to slightly engage on the other side, he's not ready to do that. So that just speaks volumes of his integrity as a honest interpreter of Hinduism. Now, Tharoor's interpretations of the Vedas, Itihasa, Purana, and Smritis, he believes Hinduism is misogynistic and he quotes Manusmriti to substantiate his claims. But he does not exactly cite what exactly is he referring to in the Manusmriti when he says these things. It's just say Manusmriti and then say, yes, somewhere there is something about it. And then another case of serious misinterpretation is the term Soma or Somarasa. He just blindly translates it as alcohol. Well, Somarasa means different things in different contexts. Soma means it means Shiva in one context, it means Vishnu in one context, Somanatha, and it is also used as a metaphor because the pressing of the drink signifies purifying of the mind and extracting noble thoughts, because the drink is prepared in a way where you press the plant and extract the rasa. So it is used as a metaphor. And this term has an history of mistranslation and misinterpretation by many Western Indologists, so it's not a surprise that he has just blindly picked that up. And he also claims that vegetarianism is a Jain contribution. Now, you need to notice how he differentiates between dharmic faiths. Jain is a separate thing from Hinduism. And also to imply that it is nothing intrinsic to Brahmins, so please feel free to become non-vegetarians. Don't listen to your ancestors. On Hindutva, he sees that as an assault on Hinduism. He thinks it's not part of the Hinduism. He's made it very clear that it's contradictory to the ethos of Hinduism. It's not a surprise that he opposes this because Hindutva movement is basically to revive the Kshatriya Dharma in Hinduism, basically to reawaken or rekindle the spirit of fighting. And it obviously doesn't sit well with his agenda because his Hinduism is anything goes Hinduism. And I need to make one very important point here. All throughout his work, not once does he ever touch upon the Kshatriya Dharma of Hinduism, which is the very essence of it and also the reason why we are all still here today. And he doesn't simply care to touch upon it because he just doesn't want you to go there. And he questions Hindu customs. Well, he categorizes caste system as a Hindu custom. And he feels that the problems have been cited and legitimized discrimination in some of Hinduism's sacred texts. Again, this is a very the colonial Indologist perspective where they cite Purusha Sutta, and it's a misinterpretation of that. And it's out there. Due to the paucity of time, I don't want to delve into that. Perhaps we can send him a copy of our recent book, Varna, Jati and Caste, for him to understand what exactly is caste system. So now I would like to analyze his work. So there are three themes the underlying themes that I would articulate across his work. One, Hinduism is the most tolerant faith. It has no boundaries or barriers of entry. And to retain this openness, you have to just remain like that even if you have no mutual respect. The Kshatriya, the action-oriented approach towards adharma, needs to be subdued as it does not fit the infinitely open, flexible, and tolerable themes of Hinduism. The ideology of Hindutva is contradictory to Hinduism. But some of the questions unanswered by Tharoor, if someone who's new to the subject wants to know about Hinduism, they'll be like, okay, what makes Hinduism so flexible and open? How elastic is Hinduism? Can anything and everything be considered as Hinduism? Does Hinduism have no boundaries at all? Can any book be thought of as the sacred text? Can anything and everything? So these are some basic questions that would arise in anyone's mind. So I've used some of the key concepts from the book Being Different to deconstruct and, refute Tharoor's work. Some of that, the three concepts are history centrism. Just to give you a gist of it, basically in the Abrahamic traditions, they believe that human has limited potential. They can't access the infinite spiritual knowledge. So God selects a few prophets and they're sent at a certain historical time to deliver the key spiritual knowledge, and to retain that accurate narrative is very important for humankind. And to lose that narrative would be catastrophic. With the scriptures that your prophets have delivered, you have no direction. There's simply no way of rediscovering it. So that's one of the reasons why they're fixated on one book, one God, that one glorious historical moment. Non-history centrism, the Dharmic traditions are flexible and open because we believe humans are born divine. Each and every human being has the capability to access that infinite spiritual knowledge. We don't need a mediator, a facilitator, a prophet in between. Tomorrow, if all our scriptures would disappear, you could still discover the ultimate truth for yourself. So that's the reason why it's flexible and open. And to have that flexibility to do that, you need the Kshatriya Dharma to protect you, to be able to rediscover the truth, which he fails to touch upon. And integral unity. So Dharmic traditions believe there is essentially no division between matter, life, and the divine. We are fundamentally, there is this underlying unity. Synthetic unity is where the Abrahamic traditions are eternally trying to synthetically unite matter, life, and divine. So here, Shashi Tharoor uses the synthetic unity view to explain Hinduism. He first inserts these cleavages, like there are these Aryans, Dravidians, this Jainism, this Sikhism. Basically, he likes to call it the Thali theory of India, where every item can't be mixed with each other, but you still got to coexist. Well, that doesn't happen if you don't have the feeling of oneness coming from within. So that's what he probably aims to achieve. So here's a quote from Being Different, where Dharma philosophers would argue that if you don't have that feeling of oneness from within, it's bound to fall apart. Now, how elastic is Hinduism? Well, it definitely has boundaries. Not anything and everything can be considered as Hinduism. If it were to be so, then we wouldn't have, in the colloquial sense, as Hinduism. Traditional teachings definitely make a clear difference between dharma and there is a word called adharma. If everything was part of dharma, then what is adharma? There is sat and asat, daivika and asuric, and so on. And it definitely has definitive boundaries, like the concepts of karma and reincarnation are very fundamental to explaining the philosophy of Hinduism. So I used another analogy from the book Indra's Net, the internet analogy, to explain the open yet Hinduism, to explain Hinduism with certain boundaries. The internet is not infinitely open, but only relatively so. Its boundaries are defined by what it rejects. For example, viruses or abusive elements. Despite these rejections, the internet has abundant flexibility for the future. Similarly, Hinduism does not comprise all conceivable kinds of spirituality and religious claims because it must exclude those that would destroy its underlying principles of integral unity, openness, and flexibility. Now, is he being a facilitator of cultural appropriation? When you so loosely define Hinduism and say anything and everything goes, obviously we will have products like the Christian yoga. Like instead of using this mudra, you can just say this. Like what difference does it? And he prefers tolerance over mutual respect, where he's constructing a one-way street. Like you just tolerate the other, but don't expect respect from the other. And obviously, itihasas and our scriptures are full of instances where when you're not accorded the respect that you deserve, you've got to wake up and fight. That's the essence of the Bhagavad Gita and many other itihasas that are still there today. But that is something that he fails to touch upon. And another serious case in his work is the number of Sanskrit mistranslations. So there are certain terms in Sanskrit which have no equivalence in English, and to loosely translate them would essentially be distorting the meaning of the word, which he essentially does. He calls Brahma, Vishnu, Ishvara as Holy Trinity, Moksha and Mukti as salvation. Well, salvation is not equal to moksha. Paramatma as the supreme soul, Hanuman as just a mere monkey god, Maya as illusion, and so on. Now, what are the implications of Tharoor's work? Well, you can see here we'll have Jesus painted as a Shiva, or there is Christian yoga, and eventually it'll be not too far away when we end up like the Native Americans, just in a museum. When your entire culture is appropriated by the dominant force, you have nothing left. Probably that's one of his goals. So here it's very clear from his work that he's looking to create this class of subservient, submissive Hindus. And he's deliberately misinterpreting the sacred text to put an Hindu to shame, where you have nothing to be proud of. So if someone says there's something bad in another religion, before that religion, you just jump up and say, oh, well, even mine is equally bad, and so on and so forth. So young Hindu readers who are reading his books to, in address to yearnings for identity, are subconsciously seeking to understand their place in the world, will be manipulated and their Hindu identities weakened. Thank you.
Namaskar. I'm very happy to be here, and I thank you for your participation and would like to pay tribute to Mr. Rajiv Malhotra's leadership in establishing this initiative, and also to the young authors who have dared to take on an intellectually challenging task. It is the right thing because they are young, and debate and discussion is a quintessentially Hindu thing to do. And I therefore encourage you in that. I'm going to make a statement on Dr. Shashi Tharoor's book entitled Why I Am a Hindu, taking into account his illustrious career in the United Nations, his prowess as an intellectual writer, and also the fact that he is a public servant who should be thinking not only about Hindus, but about all faiths in India. After I finished reading the book, I thought that Dr. Tharoor should have named it differently. That is, Why I Am a Hindu and Why You Are Not. Because Dr. Tharoor seems to have appointed himself as the licensing authority of Hinduism to decide who falls within this faith and who he has to view with disfavor. So I would like to give you 6 points of disagreement which I have with him, which are clearly not exhaustive. Point number 1 is Dr. Tharoor is highly inconsistent in his approach towards reform in Hinduism. In this book, he talks about the great souls of Hinduism, and he says how their flexibility and openness led them to face the internal and external challenges that their faith had to face. All of these great souls of Hinduism meet with his approval. He talks about Adi Shankaracharyas responding to Buddhism. He talks about the saints and the poets of the Bhakti movement, about Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Vivekananda, Gandhi, and says that Hinduism response to Islam, which I quote, expressed contempt for Hinduism's diversity, contempt for its pluralistic doctrines and coveted treasures, was renewal. At the same time, he says that Hinduism was extraordinarily strong in its defense because of its flexibility. But of course, he disapproves of political Hinduism, which he calls Hindutva. Let us apply this logic to his arguments. If Hinduism was successful in the past because it made internal changes when it was faced with external challenges, then if the situation requires the addition of a political dimension for the defense of Hinduism, why does he disapprove of this? His answer is because Hinduism was never political and therefore never should be. Now, the essence of this argument is that something cannot be done because something was never done in the past. This is the weakest of all arguments. Point number 2. He accuses the followers of Hindutva as narrow-minded bigots and purveyors of hate. This is a very, very serious charge. And consequently, It needs to be examined not only from the point of India's experience, but also whether there is something else in the world from which we can learn. And in this respect, I have a reading list for Dr. Tharoor, as he is an eminent author. The first, I suggest that he read what Mr. Shahid Ahmed, a Muslim and the former foreign minister of Maldives, has said before the United Nations Commission on Human Rights Council as the United Nations Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Religion and Belief. And I quote, "Criticism of the ideas, leaders, symbols, or practices of Islam is not in itself Islamophobia, and that international human rights law protects individuals and not religions." End of quote. After this, I suggest that Dr. Shashi Tharoor read a Time magazine interview which was published in 2017 with the General Secretary of Indonesia's largest Muslim organization, and Indonesia is the world's largest Muslim country. And I quote him to be precise. He says, "Within the classical Islamic tradition, the relationship between Muslims and non-Muslims is assumed to be one of segregation and enmity. And the extent that Muslims adhere to this view of Islam, it renders them incapable of living harmoniously and peacefully within the multicultural and multi-religious societies of the 21st century." End of quote. I also recommend some more readings for Dr. Tharoor, including reading Infidel by Ayan Hirsi Ali, a Somali, that he should read A God Who Hates by the Syrian Wafa Sultan, and Unveiled by Yasmin Mohammed, who is a Canadian Egyptian. All these brave Muslim women recount in their books how they were taught to hate the others simply because they were not of the faith. I also suggest that Dr. Tharoor reads a public United Nations documents on the atrocities which were inflicted by the Islamic State on Yazidi women and which were justified on religious grounds. If after all this, Dr. Tharoor wants to have a discussion with me on where the hate originates, I would be happy to have the discussion. Third, Dr. Tharoor tries to put a positive spin on Indian secularism, says that it cheerfully embraces financial support to minority institutions in the persistence of personal law. Is Dr. Tharoor aware that as a former United Nations official, that the United Nations position on polygamy is that it violates the human rights and equality rights of women and it should be abolished? This is not a Hindutva demand. This is a demand which has been accepted by the international community. Dr. Tharoor thinks that Hindutva looks only to recreate past glories. This is totally incorrect. In fact, the exact opposite is the truth, because right now we have a Prime Minister who not only talks very enthusiastically about the future, but he is doing something about it, and also while seamlessly connecting it to the past. It is also not a coincidence that from 2014 and 2015 to 2022, the number of patents filed in India has doubled, going from precisely 42,763 to 66,440. If Dr. Tharoor thinks that followers of Hindutva think that there is a contradiction between science and spirituality, then I suggest that he visit Geneva, the headquarters of the European Center for Nuclear Research, where he will find the statue of the dancing Shiva, which is the ultimate example of the confluence of Hindu spirituality and science. Next, he accuses the BJP of appropriating the legacy of Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. I found this very amusing, because he should know better than anyone else that it is his party which was responsible for the marginalization of the giant role of Dr. Sardar Patel, or Mr. Sardar Patel, in the integration of Indian states, because of its devotion to one family, which continues till today. And the fact that the recognition of the rightful role is in fact smart politics, and I think that it possibly also reveals Dr. Tharoor's political naivety. Next, he defends the artist, well-known artist M.F. Hussain, who, as you might recall, had drawn paintings of Indian goddesses unclad. Dr. Tharoor says that he was fine with that he did not feel insulted because the paintings were not intended as an insult. And that Mr. Hussain was inspired because he had grown up in Pandharpur, which was a religious center, and consequently, what he did was all right. Now, he further says that he did not draw the Prophet Muhammad because, after all, quote, Islam prohibits any visual description of the Prophet. Unfortunately, Dr. Tharoor's research is not quite thorough. He should read Professor Christian Gruber, who points out that there is a tradition of the depiction of the Islamic Prophet in art going back 7 centuries, and in fact, a painting of that still hangs in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and a painting, in fact, appeared in Egypt in 2012 when the country was undergoing revolutionary turmoil, which was there in Mahmud Muhammad Street. So would Dr. Tharoor be comfortable if an artist drew inspiration from that and did something which he found okay with Indian goddesses? I await his answer. Finally, Dr. Tharoor's solution and advice to Hindus is endless tolerance. He thinks that there is no threat to Hinduism because it has survived in the past and therefore will always survive in the future. This is factually not correct. What I want to ask Dr. Tharoor is that does he advise endless tolerance for the Hindus of Pakistan, who have been reduced to a pathetic minority in which the United Nations has had to step in and say, please do something to stop these religious conversions and forced marriages? Does he advise the same thing to the Hindus of Bangladesh, which, according to Professor Abdul Barakat of Dhaka University, saying that there will be no more Hindus left in Bangladesh in 30 years? And does he advise the same thing to Hindus in India, as we already have a plan to make this country Islamic by 2047? So the question is that I found an astonishing statement in his book, and he says, by extolling the virtues and harmony of cooperation, it, that is Hindutva, sows the seeds of further division by setting those who subscribe to these views against those who, for reasons of religion, politics, and intellectual conviction, do not. In effect, he is saying that the tolerant must never demand tolerance from the intolerant because the intolerant might become more intolerant. I have never come across such an argument. To conclude, this is a condescending and one-sided book. He would not dare use his methodology for any other religion apart from Hinduism. According to him, he looks down from his lofty heights and tells everybody who does not agree with him that we should draw no lessons from the past. He advises endless tolerance, and my question to him is, how much tolerance do you advise on a scale of 1 to 10, given the fact that everything is measured on a scale from blood pressure to earthquakes? What he says is that Hindus should be a community which has got only duties and no rights, and that this community alone has the burden of keeping India democratic. I'll leave this question to you. Should the burden of keeping India democratic be only with Hindus because of their supposed tolerance? I wish I could say otherwise, but when I reached the last page, I was surprised how much an erudite man could reach such weak and erroneous conclusions. I'm sure that Dr. Tharoor will have answers to my questions, and since he's a learned man, I look forward to them. Thank you.
Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat Param Brahma, Tasmai Shri Guruve Namah. So wonderful to be here and wonderful to see this output of the set of young scholars nurtured by Rajiv ji. And it brings me back to maybe 20, 22 years ago when I was a young scholar getting nurtured by Rajiv. There was an essay on Wendy Doniger, incidentally, that I actually sent to Rajiv. I'd been reading his writings on Sulekha. And Rajiv read it and he says immediately, no, this has to be published and we have to get Sulekha to publish it. And that was my first foray actually on writing about Hinduism and the critiques of Hinduism. Somewhat accidentally, that essay I ended up writing because Encarta was being used in my daughter's school in the US. And I was very surprised to see the kind of distortions that a major encyclopedia was carrying about the Hindu tradition. And I hadn't really gotten into this topic very much. And reading that Doniger's exposition of Hinduism in Encarta, and then reading Rajiv's Risa Leela series, which was exposing very systematically that this was the tip of the iceberg. This wasn't happening just accidentally that Encarta managed to carry this, but there was a whole series of steps. There was a whole series of work that was going on in academia that had resulted in that essay getting into a children's encyclopedia. So there's a long history to it, and to see Rajiv now nurturing a whole set of new scholars to take on many more Ravanas than the Doniger that we'd started off with is very, very heartening. So really a round of applause to Rajiv and to everybody who's contributed to this book. Going back to the topic of Tharoor, I find his thesis and book somewhat interesting in the sense that on the outset, it's actually a political project. And we have to be very clear, when this book, Why I'm a Hindu, is really not about why I'm a Hindu. It's a political project, and it's a political project that comes from a specific dilemma that the Congress party faced. And this came up in, I believe, A.K. Antony's criticism of the Congress, where he said that the Congress is losing ground among Hindus because it's not really articulating itself as, as a Hindu party, even reference to the BJP. So it needs to define itself as being Hindu. And to define itself as being Hindu, it has to show the BJP as the other. And it has to define BJP as Hindutva versus being Hindu. And therefore, in defining that, it has to set these in opposition. It has to set the Hindutva definition in opposition to what it means to be a Hindu. And that's largely what his entire book is about. So when you set these up in contradiction, then you come up with the kind of problems that were highlighted by the speaker before me, because you say, okay, Hinduism, and he is in fact tweeted about these. There's a whole table of memes. Hinduism is plural and Hindutva is exclusive. Hinduism is open and Hindutva is trying to restrict to a certain set of texts, and so on and so forth. I very rarely find this is actually the case. If you look at even those who are propagating or promoting Hindutva, to say, no, only use the Gita, don't use all the other texts that are there. So these are mostly a strawman argument that sets up Hinduism against Hindutva. Now, the problem with that argument is that it fundamentally fails to address what should we do with the challenge. So you claim that the greatness of Hinduism is it's plural. Now the question is, as opposed to what? So if the claim is that the greatness of Hinduism, it's plural, that means it's as opposed to the traditions or the religions that you're claiming you don't want to be like, which is Islam and Christianity, which are not plural. So if your claim is that we are plural as opposed to the other facets that we don't want to be like, which are not plural, then obviously you must stand up and resist those that are spreading this non-plurality in society. But you don't see any plan of action for how that resistance is to happen, other than to say, be defenseless. So the entire Tharoor project is really to say, lay down your weapons, do not defend yourself against anything. If somebody wants to slaughter you, offer your neck, and that is the way forward. And I don't see that that is in any way part of the Hindu tradition. I suppose he's not really even read the Gita, where Arjuna is explicitly being told to stand up and take up arms for dharma. And I wrote an essay some years ago saying that if I have to define Hindutva as something, I would say Hindutva is Hinduism that resists. So that resistance is a key feature, and that resistance is what the political project that Tharoor is advocating does not like, because it would much rather that the Hindus be so plural that it means nothing, as Divya pointed out earlier, right? If you have this definition where it means everything, then adharma is also Hindutva, and is also Hinduism, and laying down weapons against all resistance is also Hinduism, which is clearly not historical Hinduism. Historical Hinduism is the Hinduism of Shivaji, who is resisting, is the Hinduism of Guru Gobind Singh, who's taking up arms. So all these are part of Hindutva. I consider them as Hindutva icons because they're very clearly taking up resistance against the aggressors. And the same thing happens on the intellectual level, which Rajiv has defined so many times as the intellectual Kshatriya effort, to say that Hinduism is plural and therefore it must tolerate all criticism against it. At the same time, it must not criticize the other because that would be bigoted, right? So all criticism of Hinduism must be accepted from any source, because of course this is what the definition of tolerance is. But as soon as we say, well, how about this feature in Christianity, or how about this feature in Islam, isn't that problematic? And he said, no, that is so intolerant, that's so bigoted, you cannot actually criticize the other at all. So there is an inherent contradiction in Tharoor's stand about making firstly pluralism a feature of Hinduism, but really not standing up for pluralism. Because if you're going to stand up for pluralism, then you must criticize the exclusive ideologies. Then you must say this tolerance must be mutual respect, as Rajiv has said, right? You cannot just say, yes, I tolerate all of you, but I'm totally fine if you want to slaughter me. I'm totally fine if you want to criticize me. I will keep accepting it. I will not offer any defense, and I will not offer any criticism back to you. That is not tolerance, that's suicide. And most of what Tharoor is suggesting and recommending is civilizational suicide. He's saying we should commit suicide. We don't really need to stand up against any attacks. And we should not stand up to anybody who wants to convert. We should not criticize that. We should not take the battle to the other side. We should not say, well, this is a problem and this is a history of Christianity. It's a history of genocide, and this is what has happened into all these indigenous traditions along the world. We don't say any of it. All we say is no. We kind of do some bhajan and say, oh, we are very tolerant and we will accept anything that is said about us, and all we will do is self-criticize, and that is the only limit of our scholarship that must happen. So I think in some ways, all of what is being done here in this conference and all of Rajiv's work is a counter to that, moronity of saying everything is the same, as Rajiv has pointed out many times, because everything is most definitely not the same. Because somebody who is saying there are many paths to the truth is explicitly not the same as a religion which is saying we are going to heaven, everybody else is going to hell. So that they cannot be placed on the same pedestal, and they must not be placed on the same pedestal. And in fact, as has been pointed out, it is very important to be intolerant towards the intolerant. Because if you are not intolerant towards the intolerant, that intolerance will rise in society. And so it is very important to take a stand against the intolerant. In fact, if you look at conversion into Abrahamism, there's a very interesting missionary example where they say the problem with Hindus is that they're very ready to accept Jesus. They very happily put Jesus on the altar, on the mantelpiece, right along with Krishna and Ganesha and Parvati. And we are very happy to put Jesus also. And this is what the missionaries consider the challenge of converting Hindus, is that they are plural and that they are tolerant and that they are accepting of Jesus. So what is the missionary challenge? The missionary challenge is to make sure that the mantelpiece only has Jesus and all these other ones are swept away and broken and trod upon. So all conversion is a conversion from pluralism to exclusivism. All conversion is a conversion from tolerance into intolerance. And if you follow what Tharoor is saying, and he stands for plural society, the first stand he must take is, I am against the intolerance of the Abrahamics, and I stand up against it. And because I stand up against it, I'm willing to have the courage to criticize it, and I'm willing to have an action plan that prevents my society from being turned into an intolerant Abrahamic society. And that society is not being turned into an intolerant Abrahamic society because Hindutva exists. In fact, Hindutva exists to resist its turning into an intolerant Abrahamic society, as we have seen has happened in our neighborhood. And the fact that saying that Hinduism has survived and continued to survive, no, we have survived because we resisted. We have survived because we fought the invaders. We have survived. We have a book from Garuda called Saffron Swords, which has gone into multiple volumes now, which is specifically about the stories of heroic resistance to invaders. So we did not survive because we said, oh, we are all the same and you can cut our head off and we'll be fine. It doesn't matter. No, that's not how it happened. It happened because we took up a sword. We said, no, this is my dharma and I will fight to protect it. And I will fight with weapons. I will fight with swords. I will fight intellectually. I will fight on the battlefield. I will fight and meet you wherever you are. And that is the way forward for us. And that is where Tharoor really falls flat on his face. And this is where this conference is really, really important to take that war forward. Thank you very much.